Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Polachek, Ukrainian-American philosopher, historian, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Eye on Ukraine. Now, I don't have to tell any of you who watched the show that a lot has happened in recent days. We had Operation Spiderweb, which was an unqualified success. I'll talk about that in a bit. We've had the bombing of the Crimean Bridge um, to destabilize that and cause further panic. But today I want to ask the question, the official Soviet Kremlin response to the activities of Ukraine, which had a horribly destabilizing, more than a decimation of Russia's aerial capacities. Um, was this a terrorist attack? That's the official Kremlin's response, is that Ukraine, of course, is always involved in terrorist activities. That's the nature of how they conduct matters in warfare, these neo-Nazi Ukrainians. So let's address that question rather straightforward. Was it a terrorist attack? Now, Operation Spiderweb, as you all know by now, the Ukrainians used FPV drones. We know right now that Ukraine used FPV drones. They struck at the Russian air bases of Belaya, Diaghilevo, Olenya, and Ivanovo, and they had great success. The goal, of course, was to cripple the capacity of Russia to control the skies and conduct military operations, in the air. Now, as records show, some 41 Russian strategic aircraft were hit, including Tu-95s, Tu-22M3s, and an A-50. One-third of Russia's aerial strategic fleet. The loss has been estimated, at least preliminary estimations measure the loss at some $7 billion. Now, as I mentioned already, the Kremlin's response, Lavrov and others, Peskov talking about Ukraine engaged in terrorist activities. And it was yesterday, I believe, that American President Donald Duck Trump had a lengthy 1 hour and 15-minute conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin. I always wonder why Trump is so insistent on, no matter what happens, of staying in contact, in close contact with Putin in such lengthy phone conversations. Of course, they're probably done at Putin's bidding, and Putin is intent on showing that it's Ukraine that's really, when you get at the root cause, Ukraine is really the aggressor in this whole operation, right? Their willingness, their desire to join NATO encroachment from Western nations, so forth. It's the West and Ukraine that really started this thing, and Russia was really backed into a corner. There's nothing they can do. So I was bothered by, again, this conversation Trump had with Putin. I would love to be a fly on the wall and listen to what that about which they talked. We don't know, but more than likely, Trump let Putin his ear, and Putin complained about all the stuff that Ukraine is doing with the sanction of European NATO nations, without question. At least that's the story I think that Putin is trying to say. Putin said there will be a response, and he says, I'm forced to respond. Those are his words, right? And I think it's clear, I've talked about this before, and everybody talks about this, all the political analysts who talk about this, is that Putin is really majestically playing Trump for a fool, using Trump as a tool. And everybody knows that, but it's not so bad as it might think, is that Trump thinks he's the key component in solving this problem. And as actions since he took the presidency show, he's not. He winds up being a sort of prominent figure insofar as he's a play toy. But he's not just Putin's play toy, he's the play toy of leading NATO figures, Merz of Germany, Macron in France, and other people, the prime ministers and presidents of Finland and United Kingdom and so forth and so on, Poland. And Finland's leader came and actually played golf with Trump. I thought that was brilliant, right? Just engage with him in something he likes to do, and you have a good, if you play 18 holes, you have a good 4 hours of conversation with the person. And we know the German leader Merz is in Washington today, and I've already read some of the discussions that they've had. And Trump's got to get his stupid insults in already concerning World War II and how bad Germany is, and something to the effect that it's fine that Germany's building up arms again, but better not build up too many arms because we know what happened in 2 occasions. Really intelligent comment to make, Donald Duck, right? Anyways, but there's something to be said about these interactions that NATO leaders are having with Donald Trump. At least they're face-to-face communications where Putin is afraid to get out of his cubbyhole. He's probably in his bunker with helmet on, afraid of getting shelled or shot. And his conversations with Trump are phone call conversations. So there's something to be said that by having face-to-face interactions with Donald Duck, as opposed to having telephone conversations. I'm convinced that there's no question in my mind that Trump, in some measure, is an agent of Putin, that Putin has some dirt on him. That'll come out in some point at some time, maybe after his presidency, after he gets kicked out of the presidency, who knows. But anyways, to discuss the issue of whether or not Ukraine has been involved in terrorist activities. Now, notice the notion of accusing Ukraine of being terroristic is just, the pot calling the kettle black, but it's even worse than that because Russia has a whole history under Putin of just being, territory hungry, of being, of having no consideration and concern for human lives, the lives of the Russian people, the lives of Russian soldiers, or the lives of any other people in any other place. If Putin wants to take a certain state like Georgia, he's going to bomb it to hell and he's going to take it. That's just the way Putin acts, the way Russia has typically acted, or the Soviet Union throughout the decades. Now, I'm going to follow Britannico, gives us the following definition. I think it's a decent one of terrorism. He says, the calculated use of violence to create a general climate of fear in a population and thereby to bring about a particular political objectives. By this definition, I think it's a pretty good one. It's calculated use, so it's pre-planned violence. And the violence, of course, can be in different degrees. Violence doesn't always have to be calculated bloodshed. It could be violence conducted like when the Russian ships are cutting cables in the Baltic or anywhere in disrupting communications. That is violence concerning networks and disruption of communication between European nations. So that is not necessarily, violence necessarily doesn't have to be bloodshed, but it typically has been historically. The idea is to create a climate of fear, and I add to fear panic. So terrorism is fear-based, right? In a population. What do we mean by population? We don't necessarily mean all the people of a particular polity, a state or nation. It can be some subset of that. It can be the general population. It can be a specific subset of that population, like Ukrainians living in Poland. It can be the political leaders. A population can be the political leaders of a nation, all the people who run the events, trying to create terror and fear in them. So in which case, I think it's clear that the actions of Operation Spiderweb were terrorist activities because it fits the definition. But not all terrorist activities are bad per se. I mean, if you're a country that's been invaded for no particularly good reasons, as Ukraine has been, you're going to engage in counter activities against the sanguinary, the bloody aggression, and those activities are going to be for the sake of self-preservation. But at some point, when you get beyond where Ukraine is beyond the capacity where it's not just a war of self-preservation, they want to do some damage to Russia, so they're engaging. Operation Spiderweb and the bombing of the bridge was a terrorist activity designed violence, designed to create general climate of fear in a population. The population, I think, here is in the Russian rulers, right? The people running the show, to create panic in them so that there's an uprising or something in general. Now, I want to contrast before ending the sort of terrorism in which Russia has been involved in Ukraine is increasingly being involved. The sort of military tactics practiced by Ukrainians, number one, are innovative compared to Russia's conservative tactics, right? Ukraine shows tremendous regard for doing what it can with limited resources by economy, right? Limited resources, not having a lot of money, using drone warfare and using it in creative ways in the air, by sea, on land, and so forth. They're using and they're setting this technological bar, as it were, the innovative through great innovation, great imagination and intelligence. Russia lacks imagination. They're fighting the war the same way they've always been fighting war for centuries. Send in a lot of people, we're going to overwhelm you, and you're going to surrender. A second comparison would be the infrastructural or technical aspects of Ukrainians' war versus the territorial meat grinder tactics of Russia. Again, as I mentioned, Russia comes in and they throw in just, thousands and thousands of people against your lesser number of troops, and they want to just overwhelm you with numbers. They don't have the weaponry, the technical weaponry. They did have it at one point, but they're down on all sorts of stuff. They don't have the innovation when it comes to their weaponry, and tanks that are destroyed cannot be rebuilt to the same capacities because the AI aspects of those tanks cannot be replaced. A lot of the leading intellectual people in Russia have left the building, as it were. A third aspect concerns the cost of conducting the war, and I mean cost monetarily and in terms of people. The war has been extraordinarily costly for Russia, just in terms of money. They're paying soldiers extraordinary amounts of money to fight the war. At least they're promising to do that, and they've done that with many people. Therefore, the enticement to fight for war. You can't make the same money working in a factory in Russia as you can as a soldier in Russia. So there's enticement in that area. But it's also very, very costly just in terms of the whole economy. So in effect, is turned towards producing military equipment, military items, tanks and so forth, and planes and whatever they can produce, and ammunition and things like that to keep the war going. So, I mean, the country is in severe debt. There are severe problems just in terms of feeding the people, in terms of repopulating the general population, that people are so penurious that can't even afford to have children, not even one child, general people. In contrast, Ukraine's been fighting a relatively, and I say relatively, with some caution, inexpensive war, right? They know that their means are limited, and they're conducting the warfare rather intelligently by the means that they have at their disposal. A fourth aspect of the sort of terrorist activities in which both are engaged is that Ukraine has been engaged in the sort of activities in which they're engaged for survival, that they're fighting for their own lives, for their country. There's a strong inducement for them to be brave and to fight courageously and to endure, because the other option is they get swallowed up by Russia and they get told how to live and what to do by Russia again. And we know that the average Russian lives a pretty a life bereft of many of the conveniences that ordinary Europeans have at their disposal every day. Toilets, washing machines, and things like that, just clean water, gas, and electricity. In parts of Russia, these are luxuries. right? Ukraine is fighting for survival. Russia is fighting for conquest. Many of the Russian soldiers have no idea why they're fighting. A lot of them, I think, would ask the question, "What are we fighting for?" We're fighting because we're getting paid to fight. That's what. And there's a great deal of difference in the incentives there. Fighting for your life, fighting for your country's life, and fighting because you're getting paid. Otherwise, not knowing why you're fighting. A final aspect is that if Ukraine is engaged in some aspects that can be categorized as terroristically, they're for the most part fighting within the confines of just war tactics, right? Of of um, of working at the infrastructure of Russia, Russia's ability, its capacity to continue the war, right? Knocking out their planes, knocking out their ships, uh, decimating or destroying or annihilating oil factories, things like that. If they don't have a lot of ability to produce oil or sell oil, that's their main commodity. How are they going to continue the war? Russia, in effect, is doing anything that they want. I mean, these are true hardcore terrorist activities. When you're bombing hospitals, you're sending missiles into cities and towns just to create general panic and kill people at random. This is what we would call hardcore terrorist activities. The frightening here is aimed, the fear is, and the terror is aimed at the general public, causing a panic among the general citizenry such that they have democratically elected leaders, and the panic, elevates all up to the presidency to Vladimir Zelensky, where Zelensky and the Ukrainian Rada have no choice but to end the war because the general public is in such a panic, they're in such terror. So that's the one advantage that a autocrat, that a dictator has, is that he's not beholden to the general will, the vox populi, as it were, in Latin, and he can do whatever the hell he wants without regard to the will of the people. He is the will of the people. He knows better than the people do know what is in their best interest. So goes the story of every dictator. Anyways, to end, the conclusion is, of course, the tactics used in Operation Spiderweb and in decimating the bridge are terrorist in nature. In other words, they fit the definition of terrorism, but they're within, for the most part, the confines of just war tactics. If there can be a moral dimension to war, understanding the moral dimension, meaning when someone aggresses against my nation, I have a right to defend myself. I have a right to fight for my existence. Just as if someone aggresses against me as a person, I have a right to defend my interest as a living human being. I have a right to prolong my life by defending myself, by destroying the other person aggressing against me, if indeed that person is threatening my life. It's the same with, as Thomas Jefferson would say, the same logic that applies to persons applies here to nations. So in effect, even though there is, as it were, certain acts of terrorism that are justifiable, I'm fighting for my life. So if we can destroy their infrastructure, if we can destroy, cause terror such that the Russian people rebel against the leaders, or the Russian politicians they rebel against the leadership of Putin and overthrow him, that is a justifiable, or if we want to say from the argument of consequentialists, it is a morally justifiable act of terror, right? To remove an evil person. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this show. I'll do something again next week. There's always an abundance of stuff going on. I still want to read more about what's going on between the American president and the German president. And, Trump's always got to be insulting. When someone visits him in the Oval Office, it's his stomping ground. But anyways, hope you enjoyed the show. Signing off here, TTFM, and we'll do this soon again. Thank you and enjoy. If you enjoyed it, please share and please like.